It was 1993, a quiet June evening in Windsor, North Carolina, a town that prided itself on being small, familiar, and predictable. Neighbors knew each other, and trust was a given. But on that particular Sunday, in the unassuming small-town grocery store, that trust was shattered forever. What unfolded was an act of calculated, systematic horror. A single masked man bound 6 employees. Then, in a horrific turn, he shot and stabbed them. 3 lives were brutally ended that night. 2 more were left for dead, critically wounded. Astonishingly, 1 survived the ordeal physically untouched, although undoubtedly emotionally scarred for life. 30 years have passed since that night, and yet the fundamental questions remain like an opened wound. Why that store? That town? How could so many lives be so senselessly taken? And perhaps most disturbingly, how has the killer evaded justice for 3 long decades? This is the chilling story of the Below murders. Hello friends, my name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders. To truly understand the impact of this crime, we must first understand Windsor, North Carolina in the early 1990s. The town of just over 2,400 residents, nestled in Bertie County, was part of the Inner Banks region, about 90 miles east of Raleigh. It was a community deeply rooted in the rural traditions of northeastern North Carolina. Economically, these rural parts of the state faced significant challenges. Many communities, like Windsor, relied on farm-based or small-town economies, experiencing less investments and lower incomes compared to North Carolina's larger urban or coastal regions. Public services, infrastructure, and diverse employment opportunities simply weren't as available as they were in cities like Charlotte or Raleigh. This reality profoundly shaped daily life, fostering incredibly close-knit community networks and influencing how people perceived safety, the role of law enforcement, and the very concept of trust. The idea that such a brutal crime could occur here was simply unthinkable. And that's why the Below grocery store mattered so much. It wasn't just a place to buy food. It was where neighbors came to catch up on news, where families ran into each other, and where the routines of daily life felt safe and familiar. When violence struck here, it didn't just claim lives, it tore at the heart of the community itself. Grover Lee Bud Cecil, 47, from Ayden, North Carolina, was the store manager. He had only recently taken the position about 6 months prior. Joyce Coburn Reason, 36, was a familiar and beloved face to many in Windsor. A cashier at the Below for several years, she was a single mother devoted to her 2 daughters. She had plans to marry later that summer, a future tragically stolen from her. Also present that fateful evening were members of a contracted cleaning crew, not typically part of the store's daily staff, who had come in to strip and wax the floors that evening. This detail is significant. The crew included Jasper Hardy Jr., age 50, Jasper's brother Thomas Hardy, age 48, Sylvester Welch, 40, and Johnny Rankins Jr., 48. These were ordinary people going about their ordinary lives when an extraordinary evil descended upon their small town. It was Sunday, June 6, 1993, just before the Below grocery store's regular 6 p.m. closing time. Jasper and the rest of the cleaning crew had arrived at the store on Granville Street to begin their overnight job. Minutes later, around 6:15 p.m., Jasper looked up from his work. He saw Joyce and Bud walking towards him, their faces etched with a strange, unsettling expression. Behind them, a man Jasper had never seen before held a gun to Bud's back. "Do what he says. He means business," Bud told him, his words a chilling confirmation of the danger they were in. The assailant then methodically gathered the remaining members of the cleaning crew, herding the entire group toward the rear of the store near the meat counter. Disturbingly, he seemed composed and at ease as he ordered the group to bind each other with duct tape and even dog leashes he had pulled directly from the store shelves. They were then ordered to lie face down, stacked on top of each other in 3 piles of 2. No one protested. No one asked any questions. In that moment of absolute terror, Jasper even recalled a chilling thought. He believed the assailant wouldn't actually shoot anyone, as they were all complying and the killer could have simply taken whatever he wanted. The killer himself echoed this sentiment, repeatedly stating, "I don't want to have to kill anybody." But his words were a lie. Without warning, he opened fire into the helpless pile of bodies. The sounds were horrifying, Jasper recounted. Each shot was punctuated by a grunt as someone was hit. When the killer reached Jasper and his brother, he directly asked if they could identify him. When both men truthfully replied they could not, the killer screamed, "I don't believe you!" Jasper then heard his brother cry out from a knife wound. The killer repeated the question to Jasper, and upon receiving the same answer declared, "All right, big guy, I'll let you live." After the killer finally left, Sylvester, despite being severely wounded by a gunshot to the back, managed to free himself. He crawled to the office, and at 6:56 p.m. he made the frantic call to the police dispatcher. Police arrived to a scene of unspeakable brutality. Sylvester, bleeding profusely from his back wound, was found in the office. The other victims were discovered in bloody piles in a rear corner of the store. Sylvester and Thomas, both having miraculously survived the attack, were rushed to Pitt Memorial Hospital in Greenville in critical condition. But for Johnny, Joyce, and Bud, it was too late. Joyce and Bud had been shot in the head, and Johnny in the back. Thomas had been stabbed in the back with a 12-inch butcher knife from the store's meat-cutting room, which tragically broke off in his back. Jasper was physically unharmed. Investigators immediately began processing the scene. They recovered 2 spent cartridges from what was described as a military-style .45 caliber pistol. Blood that did not match any of the victims was found along with a piece of duct tape bearing bloody fingerprints. Approximately $3,000 was missing from the store safe. During the assault, the killer made a curious claim, telling the victims he was a recently fired police officer who had nothing to lose. This prompted investigators to reach out to law enforcement agencies nationwide, desperately searching for former officers matching the vague description. Bertie County Sheriff Wallace Perry offered a theory about the killer's actions, speculating that the bodies were stacked because the assailant was low on ammunition, believing one shot could kill 2 people. The sheriff also theorized that Jasper was spared because the killer had run out of ammunition and the knife had broken. This theory raises significant questions. Given the systematic and seemingly deliberate nature of binding the victims and arranging them in piles, does the idea of an unprepared killer simply running out of bullets truly align with such cold precision? Or was there another, perhaps more sinister reason for Jasper's survival? Was the killer truly unprepared for murder, or simply for the number of people in the store? These are the kinds of questions that haunt an investigation when evidence is scarce. Police at the time believed the killer was a stranger, possibly from out of state, did not know his victims, and had hidden inside prior to the killings. This was supported by the fact that Bud had locked the store door at 6 p.m. and no one else had been let in after closing. A significant setback for the investigation was the revelation that the store's CCTV cameras, which could have provided invaluable evidence, were not functioning at the time of the murders. In a small rural county in 1993, with limited forensic technology and resources compared to today, the absence of this crucial visual evidence was a substantial blow. Based on survivor accounts, a composite sketch of the assailant was created. He was described as a black male in his 20s or 30s with a slender build, standing between 5'10" and 6 feet tall. Distinctive features included light brown, slanted eyes and a military-style haircut. Police also speculated about the possibility of a second person involved, perhaps waiting in a getaway car outside. This individual was described differently. A black male, very muscular, with a dark complexion, in his mid-30s and at least 6 feet tall. This raises even more questions. If there was a second person, how involved were they? Did they know the full extent of the horror unfolding inside the below? Further complicating the picture, witnesses reported seeing a white car with Maryland license plates speeding north on US 17 immediately after the killings. This vehicle, a potential key to unlocking the mystery, has never been located. The disappearance of this vehicle and the lack of a concrete link to either suspect only deepened the mystery surrounding who was truly responsible. The brutal Below murders ripped through the quiet fabric of Windsor, sending waves of fear and sadness through the small town. It was an event that forced people who had always known each other's faces and counted on each other to suddenly wonder if any of them might be next. The grief was palpable, not just in the immediate aftermath, but for years to come. Funerals were held, marking the tragic end of lives and futures. Bud Cecil was cremated and his ashes were returned to his grieving family. Joyce Reason, the familiar cashier and devoted mother, was laid to rest in the Coburn Butler Family Cemetery in Windsor. Johnny Rankins Jr. was laid to rest in the Beaver Hill Cemetery in Edenton, North Carolina. The impact on daily life was swift and dramatic. The owners of a nearby plant shop started closing early, a small but sad symbol of the sudden loss of perceived safety. Applications for gun permits surged in the community as residents sought to protect themselves in a town where such precautions had once seemed unnecessary. Perhaps the most enduring symbol of the tragedy's impact was the fate of the Below grocery store itself. Just 5 days after the attack, the store bravely attempted to reopen, but business struggled. The citizens of Windsor, understandably, forever associated the store with the horrific events of that June evening. By the end of July, less than 2 months after the murders, the Below was permanently closed and boarded up, a stark and empty shell that stood as a constant reminder of the shattered peace. In time, the building was remodeled and eventually reopened as a branch of Martin Community College, a new chapter built upon a foundation of tragedy. Nearly 3 decades later, the Below murders officially remain unsolved, a cold case that continues to haunt Windsor and Bertie County. And with the passage of time, the questions surrounding the case only seem to multiply. Why did the killer only fire 3 shots? Sheriff Perry speculated that he ran out of ammunition. But if this was a planned robbery, does that suggest the killer was remarkably unprepared for such a violent act? Or was he simply unprepared for the number of people he encountered? Remember, the cleaning crew would not normally have been in the store at that time. They were there for a specific overnight job. Was the killer expecting only Bud and Joyce? This could drastically change our understanding of his motive and planning. And then there's the question of the killer's origins. If he was truly from out of town as police believed, had he previously been in Windsor, perhaps casing the store, observing its operations? Or was the Below a truly random location, picked impulsively as he passed through? The latter would suggest a crime of opportunity, but the systematic nature of the binding and the cold precision of the shootings seems to contradict a purely impulsive act. It's also important to remember the context of the investigation. In small towns in 1993, detectives, forensic technology, and overall law enforcement resources were simply not as accessible or advanced as they are today. This reality, coupled with the critical evidence gaps like the non-functioning CCTV cameras, has led many to believe that the investigation faced significant challenges, perhaps even being botched from the start. These procedural gaps and resource limitations continue to be a source of frustration and speculation for those who have followed the case. Author Jeb Braun has extensively researched the murders and written a book about them titled Closing Time, which I've linked below if you're interested. The Below murders were far more than just a violent event in a small town. They were a profound breach in the quiet trust that defined the community of Windsor. For those who lived there, for the families of the victims, and for the survivors, a sense of security was forever lost. People who knew each other, relied on each other, were left to wonder if such horror could ever strike again. True justice in the form of an arrest and conviction may still be out of reach, but sometimes bringing a case back into the light, asking the hard questions, and refusing to let it fade becomes a vital part of justice. If the killer or killers are still out there, it's almost certain that someone, somewhere, knows something. And until those people come forward, we must keep asking, because Windsor deserves answers. Bud, Joyce, and Johnny deserve answers. If you have any thoughts or theories about this case, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.